Hello and welcome. What a day it is going to be. The upper bracket playoffs. It has begun. Rascal Jesters versus CGA is going to kick us off on what has been a very long split. 21 game days, and this is where we've ended up. Welcoming in RMC, Magnoli, and Kashka. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good. Excited to kick off the playoffs here, JBO. Like you said, 21 long days and a couple more yet to go.
Glad to be here, taking a bit of a break from the manic whatever the hell the VCS is to come watch the LJL playoffs and lead it in. Should be a banger.
Yeah, I agree. The game's looking pretty damn pog, if I say so myself. Just excited to kick us off with the first match of playoffs.
Yeah, indeed. And before we get into the playoffs match just yet, let's have a quick look at the All-Pro teams. It should be coming up onto your screen right now because everyone got to get their vote, and after 21 days, well, we decided who was best for which role. And let's kind of talk through it. So the first one, obviously, we get to see Evie, Steel, Jet, Utapon, Harp. I don't think we're particularly surprised by anyone on this list. Are there any crazy ones that you think maybe snuck through the net?
Well, I'd say one of these is not like the other here, JBO. Look at the uniforms. Jet sneaking in here, and that's impressive when you consider DFM's regular season record here. They've looked head and shoulders above every other team. So huge props to Jet from Sengoku beating out Yaharong there.
And then if we go to the second pro team as well, we get to see some of the people that we're going to see today as well. We get to see Paz and Secret. Kashka, how are you kind of feeling about these two being on the second?
I mean, Secret definitely feels, very much deserved to me in that support position when you look at, all the supports in the league. Then, yeah, after Harp, Secret standing there pretty strong and gonna provide a very strong foundation for us to look at, the bot lane for Rascal Jesters this game.
And the third and final All-Pro team should be on the screen very shortly. And again, a couple more faces that we're going to see today. Recap, Sol, Kassin. They've all performed pretty well. Mabinogi, anyone that you're really excited to look forward to today?
It's got to be Sol. He is basically the lifeblood, I feel, of his team, the Rascal Jesters, because everything goes through this guy. 81% kill participation, which is absolutely insane for an AD carry. Everything goes through him, and he deserves third at the very least.
Yeah, they do indeed. And that is the All-Pro teams voted for by the people in the league. Now, I feel like a big question that is on a lot of people's minds is Rascal Jesters got to pick who they face. Why didn't they pick the Hawk? Because if we look at the standings very quickly, we can kind of see the CJ performed much better than the Hawks did in the season. But I do want to quickly talk about this. If we look at just the second and third round robins, the Hawks, CJ, much closer. RMC, do you feel like this was the right decision for Rascal Jesters?
Well, I think the Rascal Jesters obviously do think that's the right decision for them here, and I don't really blame them because CGA has been a bit of a coin flip team, which is always really risky. But when a team goes from 1-6 in the first round robin and then proceeds to go 6-8, that is definitely something you want to watch out for. And the Hawks haven't looked as coin flippy. In their wins, they look methodical, they look good. And so for Rascal Jesters here, if you know that you're a steady team, you tend to win the late game. You pick a team that isn't going to scale up to match you. You pick a team who you think you can beat on a more regular basis.
Yeah, indeed. And obviously, if we look at this as well, we can see Rascal Jesters performing absolutely sensationally in the second and third, potentially even saying, look, we could have deserved the Juggernaut. It's a little bit harsh to see them maybe not make it there, obviously beating out Sengoku, but that's just how the split goes. It's 3-round robins for a reason. And I want to get back onto a bit of a different topic now, red side versus blue side. And Kashka, I'm going to come to you with this one. Rascal Jesters have boasted a pretty good red side win rate. Do you think this is something that CGA have to look into?
I mean, it's definitely going to be an interesting topic going into the best of 5 because overall in the league, the split between red side and blue side wins isn't that big. But yeah, you look at Rascal Jester, they have 90% win rate on red side, which immediately to me suggests that there's something in the way they like to draft, in the way they like to play that specifically suits this side. And over the course of a best of 5, we will get to explore all the nuances of that more closely.
Yeah, and obviously each unique patch has different picks that are going to be up in the air. Mabinogi, are there any red side specific picks that you think we're going to see today?
Oh, I feel like you could maybe see something along the lines of the Renata, which I don't love as a blue side because there are options you can take into it. Senna maybe as well if you want to go for some of the more oddball partnerships, which Rascal Jesters have done with the Lee Sin and the Seraphine compared to just solidifying that Tahm standard. So I think there's a lot that they can do because they have they're very flexible in at least the two positions of mid and support. So plenty of options available.
Indeed, and I'm excited to see this one. Obviously, play styles, fight styles, they win matches, they win games, they potentially also win series. I kind of want to get your breakdown. What is Rascal Jesters' key to success? We'll kick it off with RMC.
Well, Maba and Ogi kind of mentioned earlier, everything goes through Soul for Rascal Jesters. This is a team that plays to their AD carry. They know it. That's how they love to play. I know Hachamecha tend to play tankier champions to provide that meat shield here. Sometimes I know gets to play carries, but it's a little rarer to see that. And recap, a lot of zone control to try and set up for Soul here. So Rascal Jesters, it's about skill. It's about hitting that mid to late game and then just team fighting their way to victory.
Yeah, and I think you want to add on to that one, Kashka, as well for Rascal Jesters.
I mean, yeah, maybe more in the context of the matches from the regular season against CGA, the way in which they won was just by controlling the early game, getting to those mid-late game fights and playing through Soul. So yeah, I just want to throw in the example that we have seen them do that against CGA throughout the regular season, and I should not be expecting anything different coming into this series at first.
Yeah, Mabinogi as well. You're coming from the VCS, you're coming from a region with a lot of bloodshed, a lot of active gameplay. For Rascal Jesters, it feels like they're a little bit more of a late game team. Do you feel like you'll see that coming through again, or do you think maybe you've seen something in Rascal Jesters that has maybe switched up their playstyle?
So they have leaned in a little bit as the patches have changed to pick up some of the more early game focused AD carries, things like the Zyra. So maybe it's not going to be all sit back, pick your Jinx scale to late game, but that is definitely a fallback that they will go to if it goes out of hand. But I feel that they are slowly sort of picking up the things that can push the early game, but I'm yet to really see. There's not a lot of that being shown. They've tried the Caitlyn, they've tried the Xayah. Maybe a little bit more in the top side of the map, something a bit more aggressive for Hachamecha. I mean, Volley Bear works, so they can try. They're trying.
Yeah, they definitely can try indeed. And we got to kind of talk about these two teams meeting before, right? So they've met in playoffs in 2020, and it was a 3-2 to CGA. So Midcourt's obviously praying for a repeat of history. But there was only two players that were in that matchup before. Hachamecha for Rascal Jesters and Nap for CGA. So realistically, I don't know if we can take too much away from that playoff series. But if we look at the 3 games that they played this season, it was 2-1 Rascal Jesters. Do you feel like that gives Rascal Jesters a big edge coming into this game, Kashka?
It's a okay. I mean, I'm gonna start off with I think it's a newest question. I'm gonna lean towards yes. I think it does give them the edge, mostly because of how these games went. But the one win that CGA did get is how I will be looking for them to try and potentially upset. But should Rascal Jester just draft safe topside, play around their bot lane, and execute into the early game, it's gonna be tough for CGA.
Being tough for CGA is kind of the name for the game. Looking at kind of the predictions that most of us have made, it did feel like Rascal Jesters are definitely favoured. And I want to ask you, RMC, what is CGA's way to win this game?
CGA's got it a little bit rough because CGA right now kind of feels like Rascal Jesters light. They too like to play through their bot side, though. That one doesn't feel like it's by choice. I think Kassin and Nap like to play for the early game, but they can't close it out. And then it comes to the hybrid show towards the end of things. So for the side of CGA here, I'd like to see Kassin get off to a good early game, be proactive in that early game there. That's when they tend to excel. And if Kassin can get rolling, it gets hybrid rolling as well. Buys him the space he needs to carry this sort of game. So I think for CGA, I'm looking at the jungle. I'm looking at Kassin. Get that engine room going.
Yeah, Mabinogi, the same question to you. What is CGA's way to play? How do they beat Rascal Jesters?
I think you expand off what RMC was saying, and it's not just Kishin, but I think Kaito, that's the mid laner. Yes. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Pick up the mid jungle duo. Take those and try and hit recap, because I think if I had to pick a a bit main weakness, it would be one of these solo laners, and I think Recap is potentially more exploitable than I know who seems a little bit better at playing on the weak side. Just from what I've seen. So I think if you can control that, that gives you much more control to either take up and crush the top side of the map, which is how they found their first win, or take it down to the bot lane and shut down Soul and level up Hybrid. That's what you want.
Indeed, it definitely feels like the way to play. Now, let's get into the specifics. I think that the soul, and it's no secret here, for Rascal Jesters is that bot lane. RMC, what are you kind of looking for them to play in terms of picks? Are there any specific duos that you really want to see come out of this bot lane?
For Rascal Jesters or for CGA, J-Real?
For Rascal Jesters.
Okay, for Rascal Jesters, I mean, I think Soul on anything that scales up, Jinx, Zeri, even Isaiah has looked really, really good. That said, we mentioned the Senna and the Lee Sin or Seraphine combos from before here. I think Senna is a sort of pocket pick that Rascal Jesters do amazingly well on. So I would love to see that Lee Sin early prioritized by Secret there. You could flex it to the jungle. Hachimich has looked good on proactive early junglers to try and stall out the game in the beginning there. And you pick that Senna who scales infinitely. That would be a duo that I think would be very, very strong for Rascal Jesters in the current meta.
Now, there's been some question marks about Hybrid and Nemo on terms of their picks. Obviously, Nemo has played pretty much Nautilus, Leona. If we look at Hybrid, the champion pool has been a lot of Jinx. Mabinogi, do you think there's maybe a little bit of a risk for them that they could potentially get banned out or picked away?
Possibly. I'm not so worried about Hybrid because the meta has kind of shifted away from that, and they should be learning things like that fall back more onto the lethality, like the Xayah, the MF has popped up in other regions. I know for Nemo, I feel like Nautilus and Leona are just not worth bans. They're good, but they're not that game changing or game warping that you have to throw a ban that way. They're just solid all round picks. So he should be fine.
Kachka, the final question to you about the bot lane.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think wins the straight up 2v2? Obviously, we're going to expect a lot of pressure going down to that bot side, but just given the two in the lane, who do you feel like has the biggest advantage?
I have to go with Soul and Secret. For the reason that Hybrid, while yes, we have seen him move towards more of the early game AD carries towards the tail end of the split, we've seen Soul and Secret find more success in the early laning phase. So even if Hybrid has been picking up those more meta AD carries right now, he didn't really show that just yet. And so I would say Soul and Secret are the favorite ones in this straight up 2v2.
Yeah, definitely agree. Now, onto a lane that you can't sleep on. I know a few things about this one, but I want to know what you guys think about this one. RMC, kick us off with the top lane. There's been question marks around Rascal Jesters basically saying that if Ino is put into a situation where he's kind of irrelevated, it really, really hurts Rascal Jesters. Do you feel like maybe this is a way that CJ could pivot over to the top side? Because Napa's had some pretty good games recently.
I'm still reeling from your puns over here, but in terms of Ino versus Nap, this is a bit of an interesting matchup because I think Ino tends to play for whatever the team needs. His most played champion right now is that Nars, 7 games of it. That's 1/3 of the regular season games on this one champion here. Because, like we said, Rascal Jesters likes to have Ino play that front line, that engage, buy space, buy time for Soul here. So I think Ino will play whatever is needed. And if you're trying to punish Ino, I don't think that's the right angle to go. Ino will soak up all that pressure and he'll still scale up back into the game. If he's not on Gnar, he's on things like the Camille, the Gangplank, the Tryndamere, all of which you can try and punish them as long as you want. But if we pass that 30, 35-minute mark, they'll always be relevant. So if anything, I'm looking more at Nap for Crest Gaming Act because we've said before, CGA, they look good. I want to see Kassin try and play towards the top side, get that rolling early because Nap plays more early game champions. Renekton being his most played champion. He's played quite a bit of Kennen and Gragas as well, champions who excel when they're ahead, can set up those fights for the team. So it's more Nap to step up and prove himself to me in this 1v1 matchup.
Yeah, and Mabinogi, it's a classic LJL, Renekton versus Gnar. They're the top 2 picks for these two. Is this a lane that you want to see today?
I think I'm somewhat outspoken on my own broadcast that I think Gnar, if you blind pick Gnar, you should be going 0-5 straight up because the enemy top laner should be picking a champion that exploits it. The jungler should be going up there, and you're only a champ half the time, so they can just dive you again and again. From what I've seen from Nap, he hasn't shown anything that really exploits it. You can get massively done the Renekton against it if you get that jungle attention, but so far I haven't seen an option that's going to quite punish that. So I'm not 100% sure if that's gonna round out that way. Personally, no, I don't want to see Renekton. Nah, I'm sick of them forever. But to actually answer your question, but they are fine. They will exist.
Now,
the LJL.
we heard a few stats about jungle pressure in the top side from Middlecott in the regular season, and there is potential that it's a little bit resident sleeper from Nap and Ino. But Kashka, I want to ask you, what are the picks that you think could maybe come through? Obviously, we've seen a few new ones. Obviously, we've seen the Gnar, we've seen that Renekton, but things like Tryndamere, Camille, they have started to be picked up in the meta. Do you feel like there's any new picks from Nap or Ino that you think we might see today?
I'm gonna be honest, I'm no top lane expert. So probably not. Okay, I'm gonna say one thing. I have seen some Aatrox pop up here and there, and I believe we have even seen it in the round 3 Robin. That is a pick that I will want to see how it really slots into the meta, especially as maybe a potential answer to the Gnar pick. So that's one that I will throw out to watch for.
Definitely could have some potential. And a quick one-word answer. Who do you think wins the 1v1? And we'll start with RMC, we'll go left to right.
I know.
Yeah, I'll give it to Ino.
Nah, I'm gonna go controversial. Let's go with Nap.
Okay, it's interesting. I do think it's definitely a weakness of Rascal Jesters. Obviously, we say we don't play around the top side. Maybe CJ will look to that as potentially a win condition. But let's get into the third and final part of the map. Obviously, the mid-jungle duo to recap this whole event. Do you feel like Rascal Jesters kind of have priority here? It feels like they've always had to kind of draft pretty solidly around their mid-jungle. Otherwise, they run into a lot of issues. RMC, do you feel like this is maybe a weakness? Because Kassin has performed amazingly in this split.
Little bit here. So I'm actually not too high on either of these mid laners. Personally, a little bit surprised that Recap was ranked that highly in All Pro, because both of these mid laners aren't big damage carries for their team. Yes, we see Recap on champions like Ahri and Veigar, but even then, he's still averaging, the second lowest damage per minute of all mids in the LJL here. So for Kaito and Kassin, this is probably one of the easier matchups they could hope to run into, at least in the laning phase. Now, we mentioned before, Recap, Control Mage, great for the late game. The Ahri, the Veigar does exactly that. It creates space for your AD carries. So, if anything, when I look at Kassin and Kaito, my question is, are they going to do the same thing? Are they going to pick champions which create space later in the game? Or are they looking to play the laning phase? Because Kaito's played a lot of Syndra. And if you pick that Syndra here, you have to win the laning phase. Or else, what was the point of the pick? You do fall off quite hard. So, I do want to see the Syndra for Kaito. I would like to see Kassin and Kaito take over the early. Like we said, Nap should probably win that top side in lane. And if you can get Nap and Kaito ahead in the early game, that's the ideal for CGA.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about pick and bans. I feel like it's been a quote-unquote weakness of CGA particularly, and I feel like Kaito is another one that kind of holds this potential problem. Mabinogi, do you feel like maybe their champion pool being quite small, mainly playing around that Syndra, is potentially going to be a big problem for them? And does Recap just have more picks?
Recap definitely has more picks, but that said, Recap still has a couple of picks that he definitely favors. The Veigar, the Ahri is, of course, 6 games on each, but I think... But from there, yeah, he's played a lot. As Kaito really has shown 3 that he's played a lot, and then if he's pushed off them, then he starts to pick up some of the others. Perhaps maybe the Ahri is just, it's banned away against him. He can't quite he's not able to grab it quite as much, and because that's a very contested pick, so that's perhaps the reason for the low number of games. But I feel, yeah, he's very limited. Could be exploitable if they choose to attack down the ban phase. It also helps protect Recap's rather weak early game. And I think that's definitely an option for Rascal Jesters to take to attack this mid lane.
Kashka, coming to you about the other side of this duo, the jungle side. Kassin obviously performing amazingly in this split. Do you feel like he has the edge on Hachimecha and potentially is going to be able to leverage this one for his team?
Early game, yes. If he manages to go around the mid lane, find the place, then we have seen, well, I have remember Kassin one game in specific on the Rek'Sai around the mid lane, picks up the double early on, didn't manage to translate that further, and this is where the asterisk comes in. Is that Kassin, yes, he might be able to find those early leads in the 2v2, that's what I've given the edge over Hachimecha. How that translates later into the game is going to be, well, maybe where Hachimecha takes over.
Yeah, it definitely does feel very early game centric for CGA. And I feel like one thing I want to talk about, and we can kind of see some stats there on the screen, is dragons. You know, I feel like Rascal Jesters, they love a good dragon. You know, I think they had the highest dragon control across any team this split. But in the game that they did lose to CGA, they didn't secure a single one. So do you feel like dragon control is basically representative of who is winning this game, RMC?
I think it's a very good indicator of how the jungle situation is going. So if Kassin is kind of blocking Hachimecha out from taking any dragons, that is when we know that, hey, CGA is online, and that's how I think they're going to win. So in that particular way, I do think dragons might be a little bit representative. But if things are kind of going even here, J-Real, then I think Rascal Jesters are winning. If they can afford to sack the first two dragons, especially with the way they play, the question is, can they get themselves third, fourth, those later dragons coming through?
You know, definitely indeed. And I feel like these two teams have set themselves up pretty nicely. Obviously, we saw our predictions as well. And I play a game called Mess and Impress at the end of most of the shows that I do. I want to have a bit of a That's So Raven moment from you guys. I want to see who you think is going to impress. So one name and why. We'll start with Mabinogi, then we'll go Kashka, then we'll go RMC.
I think we're going to see Hachimecha step up, be fairly aggressive in the early game. He's not super fancy. He doesn't play. He plays extremely selflessly. He will sacrifice quite a decent amount of farm to try and boost his laners, but he's getting very aggressive. He's being more efficient as the split's gone on. I think he's going to continue improving.
And then from you, Kashka, who will be your impress?
I hope it honestly will be Nemo for the support for CGA here. We touched on the Nautilus, we touched on the Leona, and those are both picks that you can utilize to roam around early game. We have seen it in some games, not all of them. So if CGA are gonna step up and be a challenge to Rascal Jester, I want to see Nemo in the early game be active and make the plays happen.
And then finally from you, RMC, who do you think is going to be the impress today?
Impress. You know what? I think Hybrid is going to impress me because I don't think we give Hybrid enough credit. Soul and Secret, both on All Pro. But Hybrid is a player, you know, he's the best farmer in the league right now. He puts up amazing stats, and that's with Nemo not being as impressive as Secret here. So if there is a player to 1v5, it's going to be Hybrid.
Let's flip it over to Mess as well. Not to be negative, but who is the player that you're potentially worried about in this game? We'll go in the same order. So Mabinogi, you can start off.
Nemo. I feel can definitely jump in and go well ahead of his team, just flash hooking on the Nautilus, connecting with a wall and finding himself in the middle of 5 players like, I'm not meant to be here. And this sort of, it feels like this is this disconnect between him trying to make a play and the rest of his team often makes him look very silly.
It is fair. Kashka, for you, who would be your potential mess?
I just want to preface this by saying that I'm going to go for someone who has the biggest potential to mess up, not necessarily most likely, and I think I'm looking for Soul. If he's going to fall behind early game and going to not be that rock that Rascal Jester rely on, then this is going to be a huge potential hindrance. But then again, this is just the biggest potential to mess up. I'm not necessarily saying he's going to.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%.
Yeah.
It's not who will, it's just who do you think the pressure is on, who can maybe not perform. And for you, RMC, who would be your potential mess for today?
I think CGA has high highs with Hybrid, but they also have low lows. And I'm going to actually name Kaito as my potential mess here. And I'm going to qualify this as a mess that might be invisible more than a mess that is all over the place. Yeah, I agree that I think Nemo might be the most spectacular mess, but Kaito has been invisible for me. True. Come from the VCS, right, Mabinogi? But here in the LJL, you know, sometimes I feel like the biggest mess are those players who just you don't see all game. And Kaito sometimes strikes me as that player who I can go an entire game and be like, oh, CGA just lost or won. Yeah, it was a 4v5. What happened to Kaito? So that's gonna be my mess for this series, and I'm hoping that Kaito proves me wrong.
Well, we'll see. Middlecourt had an interesting stat before we went live, saying 5 minutes. He's never lost lane, but we'll have to see how that one continues later on into the game. Not a lot of stuff happens for 5 minutes. So,
GD at 5, new stat.
some may say copium, some may say good stat, but either way, I do think that one thing we have to talk about, and we've kind of talked about throughout the whole thing, but it's kind of the ways to success. CGA early game lead. We've seen them do it in week 1. They were able to pull some really good gameplay. They were able to really get ahead, build that lead, and then take the game home. But Rascal Jesters, it's all about that late game team fighting, and I feel like around the world, a lot of stuff has been going to 30 minutes, so do you feel just in the meta right now, Rascal Jesters are almost favoured?
I mean, that seems like a bit of a tough question, but if you look at the second, third round robin, right, that's why we had the stats we had. Rascal Jesters only dropped 1 game in the second and third round robin, and I do think meta is shifting to favor them.
Mabinogi, obviously from a region of a lot of fighting, do you guys even get to late game, or is it kind of just over at 20 minutes?
Some and some. A lot of our games do we do have quite a few games that pull out towards that sort of 30-minute mark, but how much of that is playing with the feud, the VCS's spectacular ability to throw any lead they have, it just... I think generally, strong early game is very important in the meta right now. That's why we're seeing so many lethality carries come out, in LPL, VCS, etc. But if you have that solid fundamentals into the late game, you have to team fight at some point in this meta. So if you're good at that, and Rascal Jesters are, you should be winning quite a lot of games.
Yeah, and then Kashka, your final take on the meta right now. Is it early game focused? Is it late game focused?
I think it's tending towards that, late mid game is what I'm going to call it, which is after the point where just the early game lead isn't going to be enough to be pushing you through. You need to have that solid mid game. And so, yeah, I'm going to lean that Rascal Jester are perhaps slightly favored in this example. I, of course, also agree that early game is going to be of huge importance, but I am going to say that Rascal Jester have the slight meta advantage.
Yeah, they definitely do seem to have that advantage. I think that reflects from our predictions. We'll get the predictions of Middlecourt and Oak a little bit later, but I guess no surprise to anyone that has watched this stream before. There's only one person that has predicted CGA to win. And with that being said, do you feel like there's potential for oversight? Do you think Russ just maybe underestimating CGA? Do you think CGA maybe come back into this on some surprise stuff? Do you think... I guess the biggest question for me is, do you think CJ switch up the pan? We've kind of talked about both teams playing for that bot side. Is there any world in your mind where you think they maybe switch to play mid side, top side RMC?
Yes, like I said, I do think Kassin does play towards top a little bit in the early game there, and so I think there is a chance for that to happen in JReal. That's the reason why most of us predicted 3-1 here on the AD, and it's precisely because not so much I think that Rascal Jesters will underestimate Crest Gaming Act, but at the same time it's more CJ are just a team that like I said, they're really high highs. So I think it's more on Crest Gaming to step up and take wins away from Rascal Jesters. Don't expect RJ to ever underestimate you, but yes, they can absolutely take games. And hey, if they end up going 3-2, I wouldn't be 3-2 for Rascal Jesters. I'd be surprised. 3-2 for Crest Gaming, that would still surprise me.
It would indeed, but we'll have to see. Game 1 is going to be shortly underway, and I am very excited. I hope you guys are as well. Will Rascal Jesters clown CGA, or are Crest Gaming going to be the first to act? We'll find out. We're going to hand it over to Middlecourt and Oak to take us into this game.